When I was growing up, it was just me and Mom. Dad left when I was very young, and I hardly remember him now. Mom worked really hard, juggling different jobs to make ends meet and make sure I could focus on my studies. Thanks to her sacrifices, I got a scholarship that helped me finish college without ending up in huge debt. I studied business management because I was determined to succeed and never experienced the financial struggles we faced when I was young. After graduating, I moved to the city. Starting out was tough. I lived in a small apartment and often had to eat cheap meals like ramen. But I landed a job at a big company, starting at the bottom and working my way up. Within a few years, I wasn't just an employee there, I was in charge of a whole department. It was more than just a job to me, it was my territory. I made sure everyone I worked with felt respected and valued. During training sessions for new employees, I always emphasized the importance of respect and taking ownership of their work. I encouraged them to treat their job like it was their own business, knowing that this mindset would lead them to leadership roles in the future. The team was strong, made up of really good people. When I was chosen for the department head position, we went to a nearby bar to celebrate. It wasn't a fancy place, just cozy with cold beer and lots of laughter. Here's to Erica, our boss. Marco, who I've known for ages, lifted his glass high. Everyone else joined in, clinking their glasses together loudly in the noisy bar. Thanks everyone, we're a team in this. Here's to achieving more and making our mark. I shouted over the noise, and the team cheered loudly in agreement. That night, amid all the congratulations and cheers, I noticed Jake. He saw me looking and walked over with a grin that could light up a room. I couldn't help but notice the celebration. What's the occasion? He asked, leaning casually against the bar. Just a little career boost. I've been made the new head of my department, I replied, trying to downplay it. That's impressive. It must come with its challenges, he said, nodding with understanding. I'm Jake, by the way. Erica, nice to meet you, Jake. We ended up having a more serious conversation than I expected that night. It turned out Jake was a financier, comfortable with numbers just like I was with project plans. Over the next 6 months, our casual dates evolved into spending weekends together. Before long, I found myself at his place more often than mine. His apartment was amazing, tall ceilings, a stunning view of the city, and a warmth that my own shabby rental couldn't match. One evening, while we were gazing at the city lights from his balcony, Jake turned to me with a serious expression on his usually playful face. He took my hands in his, and I could feel the nervous energy pulsing through them. Erica, these past months with you have been the best of my life. I know this might seem fast, but sometimes you just know, right? Jake began, his voice filled with certainty and hope. I nodded, feeling my heart race as the city lights blurred around us. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box, opening it to reveal a ring that sparkled brilliantly in the light, almost as much as his eyes. Will you marry me, Erica? Yes, Jake. Absolutely yes, I managed, my voice thick with emotion. And just like that, I was engaged, to a man who truly saw me and loved every part of me, even the tough ones. On the day I was supposed to meet Jake's parents, my stomach churned with nerves as Jake drove us up to a sprawling mansion with a driveway longer than my entire apartment building. It struck me, these people weren't just well off, they were incredibly wealthy. Stepping out of the car, I felt the weight of the place. The house resembled something from an old British movie, all brick and ivy, with gargoyles staring down as if they knew I didn't belong. Jake squeezed my hand as we approached the massive oak doors. You'll be fine, Erica, he whispered, though his voice seemed more for his reassurance than mine. The doors swung open, revealing Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove. His suit looked more expensive than my monthly rent, and her dress could have graced the pages of a fashion magazine. The foyer was enormous, with a chandelier sparkling like a starry sky. Portraits of serious-looking people with titles like Sir and Lady lined the walls. Erica, lovely to finally meet you. I'm Charles, and this is my wife Eleanor. Mr. Hargrove greeted us, his voice smooth but distant, tinged with a practiced English accent. Mrs. Hargrove smiled politely, though it didn't reach her eyes. Pleased to meet you both. I managed a polite greeting, trying to keep my voice steady as we moved into the dining room. Jake whispered quick tips about which fork to use, but my mind was a jumble. Dinner felt like sitting in a freezer, with an icy atmosphere thick with judgment. Mr. Hargrove gestured towards a portrait of a stern-looking man with a thick beard. That's Sir Reginald Hargrove, a direct ancestor from England. He came over in the 1800s to establish our family here, Mr. Hargrove explained proudly. Very impressive, I replied, trying to sound enthusiastic. But it was hard to focus on eating when I felt every move was under scrutiny. When I mistakenly reached for what I thought was the salad fork, the awkward silence that followed made it clear I had made a mistake. I looked to Jake for help, but before he could say anything, Mrs. Hargrove's sharp voice cut through. Perhaps things are done differently where you come from, dear, she remarked, each word precise and cutting. Sorry, I'm still learning, I muttered, feeling my cheeks burn. Jake tried to divert attention by sharing a story about us, but his parents seemed more interested in observing my struggle with the dessert spoon that followed. With each course, I felt smaller under their scrutinizing gazes. After the chilly dinner, we moved into the Hargroves' grand living room. The plush carpets and heavy curtains made the room feel even more stifling than the dining hall. Sinking into one of the ornate chairs, I felt like I was on display, an outsider in this lavish setting. Mrs. Hargrove, sitting gracefully on the edge of her seat, leaned forward. "Erica, dear, tell us about your family. Your upbringing must have been quite different from ours." I paused, feeling Jake's tense gaze on me. Well, it was mostly just me and my mom. My dad left when I was really young, and I don't remember much about him. My mom worked hard to raise me on her own. She's a nurse. The room fell silent, heavy with tension. Mrs. Hargrove suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is unacceptable," she declared, her voice dripping with disdain. "We come from a long line of English heritage with standards and traditions. I cannot, and will not, allow my only son to marry someone without pedigree or knowledge of her own lineage." Mr. Hargrove, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. His words were measured and cutting. "It's crucial for us that our family connections are strong and well documented. Erica, can you even name your great-grandparents?" I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I only know about my maternal grandparents," I admitted quietly. Mr. Hargrove rolled his eyes, showing clear contempt. "This is exactly what we feared," Mr. Hargrove muttered under his breath. Jake stepped in, his tone firm yet pleading. "Mom, Dad, please. Erica is kind, hardworking, and she loves me. Isn't that what should matter?" His mother's gaze remained unyielding. "Respect and adherence to our family standards are what matter, Jacob. If Erica is to be part of this family, she must embrace our ways. She needs to respect her own background, even if it lacks significance." Their words cut through the warmth of the earlier evening. Jake looked at me, silently urging me to agree. Reluctantly, I nodded, accepting their conditions. "Fine," I replied, trying to steady my voice. "I will learn about your family and your traditions." Mrs. Hargrove appeared somewhat satisfied with my agreement. "Good. You'll begin by familiarizing yourself with our family tree and learning about each person in those portraits. It's not just about names, Erica. It's about showing respect for our lineage." As they discussed their expectations, a part of me felt deflated. What started as a simple meeting had turned into a daunting challenge. I had agreed to their demands, but at what cost? As the conversation filled with talk of ancestors and noble deeds, I couldn't shake the feeling of alienation, not just from these people, but also from the parts of Jake's life that were so closely tied to them. The weeks that followed that tense dinner were a whirlwind. Balancing my day job with a series of etiquette and style classes, as insisted upon by Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove, left me exhausted. My days began early with the buzz of an alarm and ended late into the night, leaving me feeling drained and disconnected. "Elbows off the table, Erica," the etiquette instructor gently chided during our session. "And remember, the soup spoon moves away from you when you scoop." I nodded, trying to follow her instructions, but my mind was elsewhere, juggling between the workload waiting for me at the office and the endless wedding plans. "You're doing fine," she reassured me, her voice calming. "These things take time to get used to." I managed a weak smile. "Thanks, it's just a lot to take in." Right on cue, my phone rang. It was Mom. I excused myself and stepped outside to take the call, searching for a quiet corner in the busy city. "Hi, Mom," I greeted, my voice sounding more tired than I meant it to. "Erica, darling, how are the wedding preparations going?" Mom's voice carried excitement tinged with a hint of concern. I paused briefly, not wanting to worry her. "It's going well. Learning a lot. Just picked up how to waltz," I replied, trying to sound upbeat. There was a moment of silence, and I sensed her skepticism. "You sound tired, sweetheart. Are you taking care of yourself? This shouldn't be so overwhelming. Remember to prioritize your well-being." I chuckled softly. "I'll do my best, Mom, but it's a lot to manage right now. Etiquette classes, dance lessons, work, and planning. Keep focused on what matters, Erica. It's you and Jake that count, not all these rules and lessons." Her words were comforting, but once we hung up, the weight of my responsibilities settled heavily on me once more. I found myself caught in a relentless struggle between pleasing Jake's parents and maintaining my own sanity. Each day seemed like an endless marathon with no clear finish line. Back in the etiquette training, the instructor's voice became a monotonous backdrop as I practiced the correct way to hold a wine glass. Apparently, pinching the stem, not the bowl, was crucial. In rare moments of respite, I'd lie on my back, staring at the ceiling, questioning whether all the effort was worth it. The constant scrutiny, the endless lessons, and the cold disapproval from Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove whenever I made a mistake, which happened more often than I cared to admit. One evening, just as I was drifting off to sleep, my phone buzzed. It was Jake, his text lighting up the screen. "How was your day? Miss you." I stared at the message, my fingers hesitating over the keyboard. I wanted to pour out my frustrations and fears to him, but I held back. Instead, I replied with a simple, "Miss you too. Long day but hanging in there." As I set the phone down, the silence of my apartment felt suffocating. Was this how things were going to be? Pushing through exhaustion, forcing smiles through stress. All to fit into a world that increasingly felt foreign to me. The big day had finally arrived. The venue buzzed with flowers, elegant dresses, and the city's elite mingling around. My stomach churned as I stood in my flowing white gown, struggling to calm my nerves. My mom came over, gently adjusting a stray curl on my forehead. "Everything will be okay, Erica," she whispered reassuringly, her smile warm. I wanted to believe her, but as the ceremony began, any hope of a peaceful wedding quickly faded. Jake's parents exuded an air of superiority. Mr. Hargrove greeted guests with self-importance, and Mrs. Hargrove made sure everyone knew how they had made the wedding happen. As guests settled in, I attempted to mingle, but Mrs. Hargrove intercepted me with a chilly smile. "Erica, dear, ensure our guests are looked after. Fetch some drinks, please," she instructed, gesturing towards a group of elderly gentlemen engaged in a loud political discussion. "But," I started, only to be silenced by her stern gaze. "No buts. You're practically family now. Show some initiative," she snapped sharply. Reluctantly, I began carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres between tables, my wedding dress trailing behind me. The weight of the fabric and the menial task made me feel more like a servant than a bride. I caught glimpses of Jake laughing and chatting, seemingly oblivious to my discomfort. As I passed another round of drinks, I heard Mrs. Hargrove's voice rise above the chatter. "Erica will be serving us tonight. It's good practice for her, don't you think?" Her tone dripped with condescension as she scanned the crowd for approval. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I approached her, my hands trembling slightly but my voice steady. "I am not a waitress at my own wedding. There are staff here who are supposed to do this." Mrs. Hargrove stood up, her expression feigning surprise. "You should be grateful we allowed someone of your background into our family. Remember your place, Erica," she hissed, her words cutting like knives. Anger flared within me, and I felt my cheeks burn. "This is my wedding, not a show for your friends," I shot back, my voice carrying more volume than I had intended. The room fell silent, all eyes now fixed on us. Jake, catching the tail end of our exchange, stumbled over, a glass of champagne in hand. "What's going on here?" He slurred slightly, his gaze unfocused. "Your mother is treating me like a servant at our wedding, Jake. This isn't what today is supposed to be about," I said, frustration bubbling up. Jake blinked, looking between me and his mother, his brow furrowing. "Erica, why are you causing a scene? Just do what my mom asks. It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal. Jake, this is our day and your mom is ruining it," I protested, hurt and disbelief mixing in my voice. He took a long sip of champagne before responding, his tone indifferent. "Look, Erica, you should be grateful I chose you. There were plenty of girls better than you, prettier, richer. You're making a fuss over nothing." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stepped back, stunned by the realization. The man I loved, the man I was about to marry, didn't see us as equals. To him, I was merely a piece to fit into his family's expectations. Clutching my bouquet tightly, on the verge of breaking down, my mom approached. She took one look at me and enveloped me in her arms, holding me in a comforting embrace that seemed to shield me from everything. "Honey, do you truly love him? Do you really want this marriage?" she whispered, her voice tinged with concern. I shook my head, my voice barely audible. "No, Mom, I can't go through with this. I don't want to." Mom nodded, her expression determined as she gently took the bouquet from my trembling hands and guided me to a chair, her touch comforting. With unexpected resolve, she walked over to the DJ, requested the microphone, and turned to address the assembled guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" Her voice, steady and clear, cut through the low hum of conversation, capturing everyone's focus. A silence fell, anticipation thick in the air. She took a deep breath and directed her gaze squarely at Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove. "I have something important to share about truth and appearances," she began firmly. "I attended school with Charles and Eleanor Hargrove. Back then, they didn't speak with an English accent or boast noble lineage. Their families were hardworking people, much like ours." A murmur spread through the crowd. Charles's father was a mechanic and Eleanor's mother worked at the local diner. Mom continued, her words ringing out clearly. She paused, allowing the weight of her revelation to settle. The portraits, the accents, the family name, they were all purchased to create a past that would conceal their true origins. The room erupted into whispers, guests turning to stare at the Hargroves with expressions of shock and disbelief. Mrs. Hargrove stood up, her face flushed red, the facade of aristocracy crumbling before everyone's eyes. "That's absurd. She began defensively. But my mom wasn't done. "To think you would stand on these fabrications and judge my daughter's worth based on a lie. Erica is worth more than all your false titles combined. She is genuine, something you seem to have forgotten how to be." The guests openly murmured now, their curiosity turning into disdain as they looked at the Hargroves. Mr. Hargrove attempted to respond, his accent slipping from refined to more desperate. "We did what we believed was necessary." "For whom?" my mom interjected, her voice fierce. "For your son? For society? Or just to satisfy your own shallow pride?" The confrontation had captivated everyone's attention, and now the room buzzed with tension and revelations. The Hargroves appeared diminished, their grand facade crumbling to reveal the stark truth of their humble origins. Jake's face twisted with a mixture of shock and anger. He stormed up to me, his voice barely contained as he leaned in close. "You've ruined everything, Erica. You've disgraced my family, and now you're questioning if I still want to marry you after this spectacle." His words cut deep, but before I could respond, he grabbed my arm forcefully, pulling me closer. "I'll teach you how to be a good wife, one who knows her place and obeys." His threat hung in the air, chilling and weighty. Summoning all my strength, I wrenched my arm free and stepped back from him. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on us. This was the man I had planned to marry. This was the family I was supposed to join. No, this couldn't be my reality. Drawing a deep breath, I channeled my mother's earlier resolve. "There will be no wedding," I declared loudly, ensuring every guest heard. "I regret ever considering marrying someone who embodies the arrogance and deceit of his parents." Murmurs filled the room, a mix of shock and support echoing through the crowd. Jake stood frozen, his mouth gaping as if trying to undo my words. Beside me, my mother provided a steady presence, shielding me from the chaos. Together, we walked through the guests, heads held high. In the weeks that followed, news of the Hargroves' deception spread rapidly through the city. Their fabricated lineage and lofty social status crumbled like a house of cards. Once admired figures became pariahs, avoided by those who had once sought their favor. They sold their mansion and left town, seeking a fresh start where their tarnished past wouldn't follow. As for Jake, I heard snippets. Tales of a downward spiral, nights spent drowning his sorrows in bars. I didn't delve into the details, nor did I have any desire to. He had revealed his true nature, a side too ugly and deceitful for me to ever look back on with fondness. "Thank you, Mom," I said one evening as we sat in our modest living room, a stark contrast to the opulent falsehood I had almost become a part of. "For everything. For being there, for standing up for me, for helping me see the truth before it was too late." She squeezed my hand gently. "I'll always be here, Erica. You're my daughter, and I raised you to be strong and true. No man, no family can ever diminish that." We sat in companionable silence, the TV murmuring in the background, a comforting normalcy after the tumultuous events. I had lost a fiancé but regained my life, my dignity, and most importantly, my future. Returning to work after the wedding disaster felt like stepping into a sanctuary. My colleagues, who had heard about the chaos, were incredibly supportive. "Erica, you dodged a bullet, girl," Marco remarked as soon as I entered the office. Leaning against my desk, he offered me a steaming cup of coffee, a gesture that felt like both a peace offering and a welcome-back gift. "Thanks, Marco. It's good to be back," I replied, accepting the coffee and relishing its familiar bitter warmth. "And yeah, that bullet was more like a cannonball." "That's refreshing," Jenny added from her cubicle across the way. "Anyone who makes you serve guests at your own wedding is no husband material. You deserve way better, honorable." I smiled, appreciating her support. "I think so too. It's nice to be back where I'm valued for who I am, not for the family I could have married into." In the weeks that followed, the encouragement from my team remained steadfast. It was during this period of healing that I met Brian. He was a friend of a friend, down to earth with a quick smile and an easygoing demeanor that was infectious. We first connected at a casual gathering, just friends hanging out on a Saturday afternoon. Brian greeted me warmly as I arrived. "Hey, you must be Erica," he said, standing up to greet me. "I've heard a lot about you. All good things, I promise." "Thanks, Brian. I hope they didn't exaggerate too much," I replied, trying to match his relaxed vibe. We hit it off immediately. His family was a stark contrast to the Hargroves. When I met his parents, they welcomed me warmly with genuine hugs and smiles. "Erica, we're just glad Brian found someone who makes him so happy," his mom said, pulling me into a hug as soon as I stepped through their front door. It felt refreshing, just genuine warmth and acceptance. Brian and I weren't rushing anything. We were taking our time getting to know each other beyond the surface level. Back at work, my boss called me into his office one day. "Erica, I just want to say we've all noticed how you've handled everything. It hasn't been easy, but you've managed to keep your performance top-notch." I nodded, curious about where this was leading. "We think it's time for another promotion. You've proven you can handle just about anything, and your leadership has never wavered." Leaving his office, I felt a surge of pride. With a new relationship unfolding, a career advancing, and the respect of those I cared about, I finally felt like I belonged.